They warned us, before the flames consumed their bodies and their names were struck from the annals of history. They left a warning, a truth so fundamental and terrifying that an empire rose to silence it. What the Cathars tried to tell us before they were erased forever was not a prophecy about the end of the world. It was a secret about the nature of ours. They whispered that this world, with its stone cathedrals and golden thrones, with its laws, its desires, and its fears, was not the creation of a benevolent God, but the work of an impostor, a prison, an illusion woven with matter and time to keep our souls captive. Imagine for a moment that everything you were taught about reality, about sin and salvation, about God and the devil, was a carefully constructed lie. Not a lie for evil, but a lie for control. This was the essence of the Cathar warning. In the heart of Europe, in the Languedoc region of southern France, flourished a culture of men and women who called themselves simply the good men and good women. They built no churches, they amassed no wealth, they wielded no swords. Their only weapon was a Gnosis, a direct and visceral knowledge that freed them from the fear of death and the power of priests. They taught that the divine spark, the true essence of who we are, did not belong to this dark and imperfect universe. We are exiled light, sparks of the true God, imprisoned in cocoons of flesh. The Church of Rome, with its rituals, dogmas, and thirst for worldly power, was not a gateway to heaven, but part of the architecture of the prison itself. They saw the crucifix not as a symbol of salvation, but as an emblem of the torture and triumph of the material world over the spirit. They looked at the opulence of the Vatican and saw the kingdom of the prince of this world, the false god, the demiurge, the architect of our cage. And for this truth, they were hunted. In 1209, a crusade was declared, but it was not a war against a foreign army. It was a war against an idea, a campaign of extermination sanctioned by Pope Innocent III to purge the land of a wisdom that could not be controlled. Entire cities, like Beziers, were put to the sword. The infamous order, attributed to a papal legate, echoes through the centuries. Kill them all. God will know his own. Libraries of esoteric knowledge were burned, turning centuries of wisdom to ash. The Inquisition was perfected, its techniques of torture and interrogation forged in the fire that consumed the Cathars, creating a machine of thought suppression that would terrorize Europe for generations. The conspiracy of silence was almost perfect. They were not just defeated, an attempt was made to erase them from existence itself, to make their heresy so toxic that no one would dare think their thoughts again. But fire cannot destroy a truth. It only makes it harder to find. Their warning survives, not in sacred texts or monuments, but as a subterranean hum in the Western consciousness, a persistent echo that asks us, what if they were right? What if the structure of our reality, the institutions we trust, the beliefs that define us, are the very bars of our cell? What if the greatest heresies in history were, in fact, the most dangerous truths? To understand the warning, we must first understand the messenger. Who really were these good men, the Cathars, who chose to walk willingly into the flames, rather than renounce their vision of reality? History, written by their executioners, paints them as Manichaean heretics, a deviant and gloomy sect. But the truth, as always, is much deeper and more luminous. They did not emerge from a vacuum. Their roots extend deep into the fertile soil of ancient mysticism, tracing a spiritual lineage back to the early Gnostics of Egypt and Syria, the Paulicians of Armenia, and the Bogomils of the Balkans. They were the heirs of an underground stream of wisdom, a tradition that always flowed beneath the surface of Orthodox religion, preserving a radically different view of existence. Catharism flourished in the 11th and 12th centuries in Languedoc, a land of troubadours, free thought, and a nobility that valued culture and independence more than the dogma of Rome. In this environment, the Cathars thrived. They organized themselves into a simple structure, devoid of oppressive hierarchy. The vast majority were the credentes, the believers, who lived normal lives in society, working, marrying, and raising children, but who followed Cathar ethical precepts and received spiritual instruction. And then there was the spiritual elite, the perfecti, the perfect ones. These were men and women who had received the sacred initiation, the consolamentum, and lived a life of rigorous asceticism. They were celibate, vegetarian, abstaining from any food born of sexual union, such as meat, eggs, and dairy, and dedicated their lives to contemplation, healing, and teaching. They traveled in pairs, dressed in dark robes, possessing nothing, offering spiritual solace and physical healing to anyone who sought them out. They were not priests, they were beacons. Their authority came not from a papal decree or apostolic succession, but from the purity of their lives. In a world where the clergy was often corrupt, greedy, and immersed in politics, the simplicity and integrity of the perfecti resonated deeply with the people. They embodied the message they preached, that the divine needs no intermediaries. They rejected baptism with water, as water belonged to the corrupt material world. The true baptism, for them, was of the Spirit, with the fire of Gnosis. They denied transubstantiation, the idea that bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ, for how could the pure spirit of the emissary of light be confined in imperfect matter? Their view of Christ was docetic. He was a being of pure light, who only appeared human, a divine messenger whose mission was not to die for the sins of humanity, a concept they rejected, as sin was ignorance, not moral transgression, but rather to teach the way back home, to the kingdom of light from whence we came. Their ethics were radical. They refused to take oaths, as an oath bound the soul to this world. They condemned war and any form of killing, including the death penalty. They were absolute pacifists in one of the most violent ages in history. They built no churches because they believed the human body was the one true temple of the spirit. They did not worship the cross, a symbol of suffering and the power of the demiurge, but revered the knowledge that liberates. These good men were not grim fanatics. They were mystics, philosophers, and healers who offered a complete spiritual alternative to a system that to them had become an empty shell. They lived their warning. They demonstrated, through their example, that it was possible to live in this world without being of this world. And it was this living demonstration, this proof that the human soul could find freedom without Rome's permission, that sealed their fate. Let us now descend into the heart of the abyss, to the forbidden secret the Cathars guarded, and for which they were annihilated. This is not a mere theological dispute. It is an entire cosmology, a radical redefinition of God, man, and the universe. It is the Gnosis that, once understood, shatters the chains of perception itself. At the center of Cathar thought is a cosmic dualism, but not the simplistic dualism of a good God versus an evil devil. It is something far more subtle and profound. They taught that to principles, to realities, exist completely distinct and irreconcilable. On one side, there is the true God, the God of light. He is pure goodness, pure spirit, immaterial, eternal, and completely alien to everything we can see, touch, or measure. He is not the creator of our universe. His kingdom is of an inconceivable perfection, a symphony of light and consciousness. On the other side, there is a lesser being, an entity the Gnostics called the demiurge, or craftsman. This being, whom the Cathars often associated with the God of the Old Testament, God of wrath, jealousy, and arbitrary laws, is not evil in the satanic sense. He is, above all, ignorant. In his arrogance, he mistook himself for the true God, and from pre-existing chaotic matter, he fashioned the physical universe, our world. This material universe, with its fleeting beauty and inescapable suffering, with its cycles of birth, decay, and death, is not a glorious divine creation. It is a flawed work, an imitation, a prison. The demiurge, in his act of creation, accidentally trapped fragments of divine light from the higher realm. These sparks of light are us, our souls. We are fallen angels, not through rebellion or sin, but through a cosmic accident, seduced and imprisoned in bodies of flesh, which the Cathars called tunics of skin. We are exiles, forgetful of our true nature, living lives of suffering and ignorance, believing this prison is our only home. The cycle of reincarnation, or metempsychosis, was central to this view. They believed that after death, if the soul had not achieved Gnosis, the liberating knowledge, it would be forced to return, to reincarnate in another body, trapped on the demiurge's wheel of suffering. Salvation, therefore, could not come from rituals performed by priests who served, knowingly or not, the demiurge's system. Salvation was not a matter of faith, but of remembrance, of awakening, of recognizing the spark of light within oneself and the illusory nature of the world outside. This was the forbidden secret. Think of the devastating impact of this idea on the power structure of the 13th century. If the material world is a prison, then its rulers, kings, nobles, and yes, the Pope are just higher-level jailers. If the God of the Old Testament is a false creator, then the entire basis of Orthodox Judeo-Christian theology crumbles. If salvation comes from inner knowledge and not the sacraments, then the Catholic Church loses its most essential function, its monopoly on the human soul. The Cathar Gnosis was not just a heresy, it was a declaration of spiritual independence. It said to every individual, "You are not a sinner who needs forgiveness. You are a God who needs to remember. The kingdom of heaven is not somewhere in the future. It is within you, buried under layers of conditioning and forgetfulness." They warned us that we have been deceived on a cosmic scale, that we worship our own jailer and call our prison a divine creation. They told us that the true battle is not between good and evil here on earth, but between memory and forgetfulness within our own soul. And that knowledge, once unleashed, was a fire that could burn down all institutions based on fear and external authority. It was a secret that had to be silenced. The confrontation was inevitable. On one side, a spiritual and temporal empire at its zenith, the Church of Rome, with its hierarchical structure, its unified doctrine, and its power to crown and depose kings. On the other, a decentralized faith based on personal experience and a cosmology that turned Christian dogma on its head. The clash between Catharism and Rome was not a simple theological dispute. It was a collision of two universes, a war over the definition of reality itself. For the Church, Cathar beliefs were more than heresy. They were a deadly blasphemy, an infection that threatened to rock Christendom from within. Let's analyze the breaking points. First, the nature of God and creation. The Church taught that a single good God created the material world, and that creation was intrinsically good. The Cathars said the world was a prison created by a lesser, imperfect God. This undermined the very idea of God's sovereignty over all that exists. Second, the figure of Christ. For the Church, the central dogma was the incarnation. Jesus was God made flesh, who physically suffered and died on the cross to redeem the sins of humanity. For the Cathars, this was a horror. The pure spirit of an emissary of light would never defile itself with corrupt matter. Christ did not have a real body and did not truly die on the cross. His mission was to teach, not to be a sacrifice. This not only denied redemption, but made the central symbol of Christianity, the cross, an object of veneration to an illusion. Third, the sacraments. The Church maintained that divine grace was dispensed through 7 sacred sacraments, administered by an ordained priesthood. Baptism, Eucharist, marriage, all were gateways to salvation. The Cathars rejected them all. Baptism with water was useless. Bread and wine were just food. Marriage and procreation were viewed with suspicion, as they trapped more souls in material bodies. Their total denial of the sacramental structure was a direct attack on the power and a reason for being of the clergy. Fourth, the authority of the Church. The Cathars saw the Roman Church as a corrupt institution of the material world, the Church of Wolves, which had betrayed Christ's teachings. They considered themselves the true Church of love, heirs to the pure apostolic tradition. By denying the authority of the Pope, bishops, and priests, they placed themselves in direct rebellion against the established order. Rome tried to react in several ways. First, it sent preachers and missionaries, like Saint Dominic, to debate with the Cathars and reconvert the people. But the simplicity and purity of life of the perfecti often outshone the rhetoric of the papal envoys. The people saw the hypocrisy of a wealthy clergy preaching poverty. When persuasion failed, coercion began. Pope Innocent III, one of the most powerful and astute pontiffs in history, saw the existential threat that Catharism posed. In 1208, after the murder of his papal legate, appeared at Castelnau, he found the pretext he needed. He called for the Albigensian crusade, offering the nobles of northern France the lands of the southern lords who protected the Cathars. It was a brilliant political and spiritually devastating maneuver. The ensuing war was of unprecedented brutality. It was not about conquering territory, but about annihilating a culture and a faith. The logic was that of total purification. Cities were burned, entire populations massacred. The Inquisition, established to eradicate the remaining pockets of heresy, turned persecution into a science. Neighbors were encouraged to denounce neighbors. Torture was used to extract confessions. The bodies of the condemned were burned in autos da-F and their property confiscated. The clash with Rome was total because the Cathar vision allowed for no compromise. It asserted that the dominant religious system was not just wrong, but a fundamental part of the cosmic problem. For the Church, to tolerate such an idea would mean admitting the possibility that its vast power rested on a foundation of sand, a theology that served the demiurge. The only possible response was extermination. Although their libraries were reduced to ashes, fragments of their rites and living practice have survived, whispered in Inquisition records and preserved in the hidden memory of the West. Cathar spirituality was not a faith of passive belief. It was a path of active transformation, a technology of the soul designed to dismantle the inner prison and prepare the spirit for its ascent back to the light. The pinnacle of their ritual life was the consolamentum, the consolation. This was the only Cathar sacrament, and it was far more than a ceremony. It was considered a direct transmission of the Holy Spirit, an initiation that purified the soul of all the forgetfulness accumulated through reincarnations and reconnected it directly to the realm of light. There were two ways to receive it. Most credentes received it on their deathbed, as a form of final rite of passage to ensure the soul would not return to this world. But for those who wished to dedicate their lives entirely to the spiritual path, receiving it meant becoming a perfectus or a perfecter. The ritual itself was of a powerful simplicity. The candidate would undergo a period of fasting and preparation. Then, in the presence of other perfecti and the community, he or she would make solemn vows of renunciation of the demiurge's world. The crucial moment was the laying on of hands. The officiating perfect placed a copy of the Gospel of John on the initiate's head and, along with the other perfecti present, laid on hands, reciting the Our Father, the only prayer they considered valid, interpreted in a purely spiritual way. It was believed that in that moment, a current of light, a lineage of Gnosis, passed from master to disciple since apostolic times, was transmitted. The initiate died to their old life and was reborn as a vessel of the Spirit. From that moment on, their life was governed by a rigorous ethic. The asceticism of the perfecti was not a form of self-punishment, but a pragmatic discipline. They saw the body and its desires as the primary mechanisms of the demiurge's entrapment. Indulgence in food, especially meat, and in sexual desire, strengthened the soul's ties to matter and the cycle of reincarnation. By living simply, eating a strict vegetarian diet, and practicing celibacy, they sought to weaken the body's dominion over the spirit. Non-violence was absolute. Not only did they refuse to fight, but they believed that killing any sentient creature was a sin against the spirit. This extended to their refusal to take oaths, as an oath was a form of violence against truth, forcing the soul to bind itself to future statements in an impermanent world. How can we apply this living practice today, in a world that seems to be the antithesis of everything the Cathars stood for? The application is not in imitating their rituals, but in understanding their principles. The consolamentum teaches us about the need for a moment of conscious decision, a turning point where we declare our intention to awaken. This could be a personal vow, a deep meditation, a commitment to seek truth above comfort. Their asceticism invites us to examine our own attachments. What do we consume? Not just food, but information, entertainment, relationships that numbs our spirit. Where in our lives does the pursuit of momentary pleasure trap us in cycles of desire and dissatisfaction? The Cathar practice is a call for catharsis, for purification. It is an invitation to simplify, to subtract what is unnecessary, to create an inner space of silence where the voice of the soul, the memory of our origin of light, can finally be heard. They warned us that freedom requires discipline, that transcendence begins with renunciation, not of the world itself, but of our attachment to the illusion. Centuries have passed since the last fires went out at Montsegur. The conspiracy of silence was, for the most part, successful. Catharism, as an organized religion, was extinguished. However, the hidden legacy of their warning, the Gnosis they protected with their lives, never completely vanished. It survived, flowing like a subterranean river, emerging in unexpected places, echoing in the work of mystics, poets, and philosophers who sensed that this world was not all that there is. Cathar ideas echo in the writings of William Blake, with his distinction between the noble Urizen and the divine loss. They resonate in existentialist philosophy, with its notion of being thrown into an absurd world. They vibrate in Western esoteric traditions, from the Rosicrucians to certain currents of theosophy, which speak of an ancient wisdom and a divine spark within humanity. Today, in our age of information overload and spiritual emptiness, the Cathar call for inner awakening is more relevant than ever. The demiurge has changed form. The prison is no longer built only with religious dogma and feudal power. Its walls are now made of ceaseless consumerism, digital distraction, polarizing ideologies, and the belief that our identity is defined by what we own, our image, or our social status. The Cathar warning for modernity is this: beware of any system, whether religious, political, or technological, that tells you salvation or happiness lies outside of you. Beware of anything that demands your blind faith instead of your direct knowledge. Beware of the noise that drowns out the inner quiet. They call us to become spiritual warriors, not to fight against the world, but to fight for our own consciousness within it. They invite us to perform the great work, the liberation of the spark of light from within the prison of the conditioned personality. Their legacy is not a doctrine to be followed, but a question to be lived. Are you a body that has a soul, or are you a soul temporarily inhabiting a body? Your answer to that question changes everything. What does this mystery awaken in you? Is it fear? Is it resonance? Is it a strange sense of familiarity, as if you are remembering something long forgotten? The truth the Cathars defended cannot be taught. It can only be rediscovered. And the journey to that rediscovery is the most important path any of us can ever walk. If this exploration into the heart of one of history's greatest mysteries resonated with you, help this message continue its journey through time. Subscribe for more investigations into hidden wisdom. Like this video so the flame of knowledge can reach other seekers, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think was the true warning of the Cathar? As a reflection ritual of the day, I invite you to practice Cathar discernment. Today, observe the world around you, in your interactions, in what you read, in what you watch. Ask yourself silently, does this serve the light, or does it serve the illusion? Does this expand my consciousness, or contract it? Does this connect me to my essence, or distract me from it? Do not judge the answers, just observe. This act of conscious observation is the first step on the path of remembrance. It is the beginning of breaking the chains. For as the good men knew, truth cannot be burned, and light, once rediscovered, cannot be extinguished.